Hey everyone, before we explore today's story, a big thanks to today's sponsor Skillshare. Skillshare is an amazing online community where you can explore new skills, develop existing interests, and get lost in creativity. With thousands of excellent courses, there is something for everyone, with topics ranging from lifestyle, productivity, entrepreneurship, and so much more. A course I am loving at the moment is Productivity for Creatives. Build a System That Brings Out Your Best by Thomas Frank, which is helping me to be efficient in my creative work and on YouTube. Whether you're a dabbler, a hobbyist, or a master, Skillshare is where you need to be. Make sure to check it out as soon as you can, because the first 1,000 people who use the link in my description will receive a 1-month free trial to Skillshare Premium. From 1817 to 1820, a Tennessee farmer by the name of John Bell and his family were tormented by a Bell witch, or ghostly entity, which gradually got worse as years went on and would have tragic consequences for John Bell and his family. In the decades that followed, the story became part of Southern folklore, yet, despite being a fable, it was repeated so often that it essentially became historical fact. So, what actually happened to John Bell and his family? John Bell was born in Edgecombe County in North Carolina around 1750, when the Carolinas still made up 2 of the 13 colonies, which owed their allegiance to King George II of England. Hailing from a relatively modest background, Bell trained for some time in his youth as an apprentice barrel maker, before eventually resolving to become a farmer, a not uncommon occupation in rural North Carolina. As a young man, he would have witnessed the events of the American War of Independence in the 1770s and into the 1780s. In 1782, Bell started a family when he married Lucy Williams. They lived together in North Carolina for many years thereafter and would eventually have 6 children together. But in the early 18th century, when Bell was in his 50s, the family elected to move their lives westwards to the area which had been established in 1797 as the state of Tennessee. As such, the Bell family were a typical example of the many pioneer families who set off west in the United States in the late 18th century and early 19th centuries to settle the lands further inland towards the Mississippi River. In Tennessee, the Bells settled in a region called Red River, in a part of what is now Robertson County, in the mid-north of the state. Living here by 1805, Bell carved out a significant estate for himself and his family. He was also regarded as one of the most prominent settlers in this frontier region, and then, many years after settling in Tennessee, his life was turned upside down. It was while he was working on his farm sometime early in 1817 that John Bell apparently first encountered the Bell Witch, though at the time he witnessed it simply as a sighting of what appeared to be a strange animal, a black dog with the head of a rabbit. Further strange occurrences mounted around the Bell family in the weeks that followed. John's daughter Betsy, for instance, is said to have seen a girl swinging from a tree on the farm. Closer to home, the family are recorded as saying they heard pounding and scraping noises on the walls and floor of their homestead. The Bells would later report that these noises and apparitions soon escalated to direct contact with the spirit, with it pulling furniture around the home, tugging on bedsheets, and eventually physically assaulting Betsy Bell, John's daughter. At the time, the Bells were said to have had various theories about what the entity was. In later accounts, it was suggested that they believed it was the spirit of a Native American who had been buried somewhere on the Bell farm and which had been disrupted at one point by one of the family members. But perhaps the most popular account in subsequent records of the Bell Witch haunting argued that the spirit was actually the work of a woman living in the Red River area, a neighbour of the Bells by the name of Kate Batts. Such an interpretation would have followed the typical parameters by which witches were identified in earlier times, during the 16th and 17th centuries. Bats was a social outcast of sorts in the local community, and typically, women who had been accused of witchcraft in earlier times were women who did not conform to certain social structures, for instance, by refusing to marry. At first, the family seemed to have decided to keep the haunting a secret from their neighbours. America was, after all, a deeply religious country, and it might result in them being socially spurned by their fellow Tennessee settlers were they to reveal what was happening. However, as the situation escalated and dragged on interminably, John Bell eventually confided to a number of members of the community of Red River, including the local preacher. But rather than being appalled and ostracizing the Bells from their community, in the weeks that followed, the family became a cause of some considerable celebrity as a result of the alleged haunting that they were experiencing. This was not just the case in the local area. People from all over Tennessee and southern Kentucky, the state to the north of Tennessee, were soon making their way to the Bell farm. The future President of the United States, and like Bell, a Tennessee man who had been born in the Carolinas, Andrew Jackson, is even supposed to have taken a break from conquering Florida in the First Seminole War to visit the Bell house in 1819. Indeed, Jackson is rumoured to have first come up with the term the Bell Witch to describe the entity which was haunting John Bell and his family's home, though the story of his visit may well be invented. The curious thing about the Bell Witch haunting is that while these visitors often arrived expecting that they would find nothing out of the ordinary at the Bell farm, as the weeks and months passed, more and more of these travellers came to believe that the house was actually haunted by some sort of spirit. Moreover, it seemed to be getting stronger and more violent the more people visited the house. The Bell Witch haunting might have been an inexplicable phenomenon up to 1820, but one which had little material consequences other than to garner a regional celebrity status for the family. Indeed, the fame gained would certainly stand as one possible explanation for what happened. Perhaps the family were fabricating the haunting in order to generate interest in their farmstead. Presumably, they were profiting in some fashion from all the visitors to Red River. However, it wasn't long until the haunting took a more sinister turn. It was in 1820 that John Bell became seriously ill. He suddenly found it difficult to swallow, and this affected his ability to eat, while he also began suffering from seizures. Finally, after weeks of this, the spirit is alleged to have poisoned Bell in some manner on the 20th of December 1820, as a bottle of some sort of toxin was found next to John's deathbed. Thus, the Bell Witch who had haunted the Bell family for around 3 years was apparently responsible for the actual murder of John Bell. Yet, there is no real way of fully explaining the many elements of the Bell Witch haunting case. As mentioned, one explanation is that the family was simply fabricating elements of it in order to profit from their many visitors. Of John Bell's death, it should be noted that he was approaching 70 years of age in 1820, a very ripe old age for the early 19th century, and it is most likely that he succumbed to a number of deteriorations in his health which subsequently were blamed on the spirit. Others still have proposed that the Bell Witch haunting was largely a fabrication of Betsy Bell, one of John's children, who was suspiciously central to a great many of the alleged instances which we have documentary reporting on. However, perhaps the most likely explanation is that John Bell himself was suffering from a neurological disorder, and that this led him to believe that the spirit did actually exist and was haunting the house and the farm. This hypothesis that some cognitive affliction on John Bell's part was responsible for the alleged haunting would certainly seem to be borne out of the fact that the Bell Witch largely disappeared after his death, apart from a few fleeting mentions by Bell's children in the years that followed, notably Betsy. Thus, it seems most likely that the Bell Witch was a product of John Bell's imagination, and any others who were convinced of its existence were so by witnessing Belle's reaction to it in the house, rather than their own perception of any spirit. This may have been compounded by a willingness on Betsy's part to substantiate her father's delusions. There the matter might have rested, but in the years and decades ahead, the concept of the Bell Witch was picked up and utilised to explain many other phenomena which occurred across the southern United States. Many of these focused on Tennessee. For instance, in 1880, a story was published regarding an allegedly haunted house in Springfield, Tennessee, also in Robertson County, and not far from the Bell farm. The house was apparently experiencing loud and unidentified knockings at night. Newspaper reporting on this in 1880 noted the similarities between the case and the Bell Witch haunting, which had occurred on John Bell's farm 60 years earlier. Indeed, the Nashville Banner, at the time a daily newspaper published out of Nashville, Tennessee, had even sent a reporter, one John C. Cook, to investigate the possibility that the haunting of the house at Springfield constituted a re-emergence of the earlier entity which was said to have killed John Bell in 1820. Thus, what we have here is a situation where the Bell Witch haunting, a phenomenon most likely explained by a neurological issue of John Bell's, was many years later being interpreted as a piece of mythological history, or mythohistory. This tendency only increased in the years ahead, and there are numerous other incidents in the 1880s of individuals exploring whether the Bell Witch had re-emerged in Tennessee and the surrounding states. This mythohistory was cemented in 1894 when a former editor of the Clarksville Chronicle in Tennessee, Martin Ingram, published a manuscript he'd been working on for some time entitled An Authenticated History of the Famous Bell Witch, the Wonder of the 19th Century, and Unexplained Phenomenon of the Christian Era, the mysterious talking goblin that terrorized the west end of Robertson County, Tennessee, tormenting John Bell to his death. Ingram's book presented what had happened on the Bell farm nearly 3/4 of a century earlier as genuine historical fact. The book opened with Ingram declaring, "It may be a strange story, nevertheless it is authentic." Thus, a piece of mythohistory which had been gaining popular currency in the southern states in the 1880s and 1890s, was distributed to an even greater audience as a result of Ingram's work. Today, the Bell Witch haunting lives on in popular culture. Several films have drawn on aspects of the story of the Bell Witch haunting, most notably The Blair Witch Project of 1999 and the Poltergeist film series. This piece of mythohistory has also been explored in television. For example, in 2018, the Travel Channel series Haunted Lives featured an episode in which the presenters visited the Bell farm and were taken around the area where the events happened by descendants of the Bell family. Equally, many books have appeared since Ingram's original take on the myth in 1894, exploring the topic of the Bell Witch haunting. Thus, whatever the real explanation for what occurred on the Bell farm between 1817 and 1820, the Bell Witch haunting as a piece of mythohistory lives on. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on the Bell Witch haunting. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave me a like and a comment down below. And if you're new, why not subscribe? If you'd like more witch videos, please let me know down in the comments. And if you have any other suggestions, you can also leave them in the comments or find my Instagram and email in the description. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks!